So we've got a nice landscape today. I've loosely drawn it out. I've got a couple of hills, a field here, a bit of a dilapidated dry stone wall, and an idea of where my tree is. I don't want you to go too dark with your pencil because it does show up through the watercolour. So I'm going to come straight on with some water into the sky. I'll talk through my colours as we go. I'm just totally ignoring the tree. Okay, so I've got round number 10. I'm going to dab into some raw sienna. I'm just going to sweep some of that through towards the bottom. So you'll notice that I loaded my brush up with water first and I've gone into the neat paint. That's a way to dilute it without diluting it. So I've got a mix here of cobalt blue, that's about half a teaspoon of water and about a pea-sized blob of paint. You can see here the colours that I've made. So I've got cobalt blue and I've got permanent rose. So I'm going to come on and I'm sweeping this through. I'm going to avoid the raw sienna. I am going to come over where the tree is going to be. So this is a bit more of a wispy sky today, so I haven't got to do too much in the way of clouds. It's just about wisping the colour in. So you'll notice, rinse my brush off, I've dabbed it off on the kitchen towel, I'm picking up some of the rose. So the rose can just be swept in within the raw sienna and also a bit further up. So I'm going to sweep some of that in here as well. It's pretty much a case of pop it on and let it do its thing. Don't sweep it through too much. Just going to soften that line in there. Okay, so next I'm going to come down to this field. So this front field, I'm going to pop a bit of water on with my round number 10. Again, I'm coming over the tree trunk. I'm ignoring that there's sheep there at this moment in time. Load my brush up with water, dab into the raw sienna and bring that through. I've not gone down onto this bit of the picture because I'm just waiting for that to dry a little bit. I might end up having to dry it off depending on how quick I work. Load my brush up again, I'm dabbing into sap green. I want this to be fairly strong because it's towards the front, so keep it nice and fresh. That gives a good sense of distance. If I drop down to round number 6, I'm just going to dip into some burnt sienna. So these are all neat colours that I'm leaving neat on the plate, on the palette. I'm just sweeping a little bit of that through for shadow. This is actually an autumn scene, but it's still useful for trees. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off. Nicely dry now, and I'm just going to start to come onto these distant fields. So I'm going to do this one first, that's furthest away. And I'm popping a bit of water on with my round number 10, and then I'm going to use my number 6 to come in with the colour. Now, because this is a distant field, it's good to use a little bit of the sky colour because that makes it a little bit more distant. So I'm going to come in with some cobalt blue. A slight hint of the sap green, so I'm not taking much in at all. I want it to be very pale. Tiny bit of the rose, just towards that top edge. And then I'm going to dry my brush off and dab into the neat burnt sienna. I'm going to pop in, just by dabbing on this bottom line, a few distant autumn trees. So because the paint's thick, it will stay put and it will make a tree shape very easily. A nice soft effect. If you want to just darken them off a little bit or dull them down a bit, then you can just take in a tiny bit of cobalt blue. You've got to be careful with the cobalt blue, it tends to be quite strong and can overpower, so I'm just taking a tiny bit on my brush, just on the tip, and then just coming in, just knocking those back a little bit. Okay, so while that's settling, I'm going to come into the front, this dry stone wall. So I have another video which I'll post a link of that goes through clean film to create texture on a dry stone wall. Today I'm going to use a little bit of salt. So load a brush with water. I'm going to come in first of all with a bit of raw sienna. Rinse that off, then some dabs of burnt sienna. So just randomly dabbing through. Then a colour we've not used, this is sepia. Again, randomly dabbing through. A tip here is to make sure you've got more dark colour than you think, because the salt is going to take it away. So go a little bit overboard with the dark of the sepia. You'll get a much nicer effect. I'm ignoring the tree trunk. You'll notice that I come totally over the tree as I'm going. We'll worry about that later. There's always background behind trees. What I've got here is just normal table salt. In fact, I've just nabbed the salt pot from the kitchen. And I'm just going to very lightly sprinkle it on. You don't want to load it, you're just sprinkling. If you load it, you get big clumps, they go all wet and it doesn't work. So we're just lightly sprinkling. And then we're going to leave that to build some texture. Okay, so let's, while that's doing its thing, come into this middle section we haven't done yet. I'm just going to leave a very fine dry line between those two, in case that one's still drying, that I can fill in later. So I'm just popping the water on with around number 10 because I don't want it to be too watery. The reason I'm saying that is because I've got to put trees onto here and I don't want them to just disappear. So we're going to come on with a little bit of the raw sienna. A little bit of the sap green. So tonally, I want it to be lighter this field than that field. So I'm using exactly the same colours, but I want a lighter feel to it. That just gives a great sense of distance. All these little tips just help build a sense of distance, really. I'm just going to take a dab of the rose through. Now the reason I've done that is because there's a little bit of rose at the top and that just adds a synergy to it. Okay, just drop down to a number 6 and I need to start some trees. So straight into my sap green. And I'm going to start to come on with some trees. Now you can see it is a little bit wet. Just really should bide my time. I don't mind when it spikes a little bit. So these are all quite full trees. So I'm just coming along and creating a nice tree shape and these distant trees. Keeping it within that field. I'll show you what to do to rectify the spiky bits in a minute. I'm going to bring a little bit down here, but not a lot. I've not rinsed my brush, I've gone straight into the burnt sienna. So I'm going to start to get these nice autumn tones. Just vary the height. Just dabbing in. Then I'm going to dab into the blue mix. In fact, that's a bit light. I'll dab into the neat cobalt blue. Just going to get some dark towards the bottom. You can just mix on the paper. Nice dark edge at this bottom edge. It's going to help define that field. Okay, if I rinse my brush off and dab that off so it's totally dry, I can just lift this spiky tree out. The other one I'm not too concerned about. And just sweep a little bit more colour back in. So I'm keeping it very, very dry, what I'm doing, because this is nearly dry now. So that's just corrected that spiky tree that was a bit too spiky. And then I've just dabbed into the sepia now, and I don't want a line, but I'm just going to pop little bits of dark along this bottom edge. So lots of gaps. Just want that little bit of dark there. You can see now that the salt's doing its thing, so it doesn't take long at all. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off. So that's nicely dry now, and I've just rubbed the salt off lightly because you don't want it to reactivate or to stay on the picture. So the next thing that I'm going to do is to work a little bit into these trees, and then to do this big tree here. I'm going to use a sponging technique for that and a little bit of dry brushing. So these ones, so they've got the same distant effect, and what we need to do now is just make these ones less distant. So to do that, I'm going to do a little bit of dry brushing. So I'm dabbing into the sap green. I'm going to hold my brush like this, and I'm just going to come over. In fact, I'm going to make it a bit darker so that it actually shows. So I'm going to scrape the surface. So this is just giving a little bit more detail to these ones. You don't have to eliminate everything you've done, you can still have the soft edges. Just dabbing into that blue just to make them a bit more prominent. And just scrape the surface. You can dab a little bit into the burnt sienna as well. You just need to have enough water, because although it's called dry brushing, enough water on the brush to catch the surface. I always use a rough paper. I like a rough paper. I think it gives you more texture. and that just gives you a bit of variety on that one. So we're going to work now with a sponge. I'm going to use this rose mix and take a little bit more of the rose in, and then a nice big blob of that burnt sienna. This is quite an autumn tree. You always need more than you think when you're sponging as well, so make sure you've made plenty. And then I want the sepia to have a little bit of water there. So I'm just taking a little bit in, so I've got a bit of a mix. And I'm going to do the same with just a little bit of the raw sienna, so I've got some lighter foliage as well. So I've got a natural sponge, it's got lots of bobbly bits. I've wet it, I've wrung it out, I've dampened and like dabbed it off so it's literally just damp. And then I'm going to dip in with the bobbly bits, squeeze the sponge and just come on. And as you dab, I want you, every time you come in the air, to twist a little bit, so you always get a different effect. So I'm dab, I lift up, I twist, and every time it's different when I'm going back down. So this is the raw sienna we're coming on with first. Just build up some lighter texture. Can then go straight in to the burnt sienna rose mix. We're going to start to build that up. That same dab and then move. So you're twisting all the time. Just look at the shape of your tree. You can squeeze the sponge to get it to the right shape. And you're just gradually building this up. Dab a little bit into the sepia, then start to bring that in where you've got the darker areas. Okay, with my round number 10, there's my round number 6, correction, I'm going to come in and start to create the tree trunk. So this is just with sepia on to dry. I'm going to come down to the wall. We'll place it the other side of the wall. I can't actually see from the photograph whether it's this side or the other side because it's quite dark. We'll place it the other side of the wall, and then you can take off a couple of branches. There's a couple I can see here. And then with that neat sepia, whilst it's still damp, I want you to dab in. So we're going to get some of these areas nice and dark. So where you've put the sponging, I just want you to pop in some darker areas. It's the easiest way to do it because you've got the sponging there as reference. And you can just work through. These darks are really important. They'll just bring this out really well. Now you can see an odd branch. If you want to pop any in, just do that very lightly. I'm resting on my little finger. Give that a little rinse off. And now I need to just make up some more of that mix. So a few dabs of water, some of the rose, A nice blob of the burnt sienna. If you want to make it slightly darker, just take in a hint of blue. So I've rinsed my sponge off, not my brush, sponge, dabbed it off again. Then I'm going into this colour and I'm just going to build this up, build the texture up. Remember, dab and twist. And it works quite well to carry on whilst this is all still damp, because you're blending those sepia brush marks in as well. Then I'm going to come back into the sepia, so this is quite neat now, and just bring a little bit of that through. So you notice that I'm not going towards the outside edge of the tree, I'm keeping it where I've got the darks, apart from the bottom that will be a little bit darker. That's working really nicely. So the last thing I've got to do is pop a couple of sheep in. Less is always more. Now I could have tried to do these with masking fluid, but they do tend to look a little bit blobby. So what I've got here is a little bit of white gouache, and I'm just going to pop in a couple of sheep. So round number 6, I'm going to pop in, how many shall I do? 3. We're not going to do all of them. So you've got the woolly bit, and you can swap down to a smaller brush if you want to. I always like to try and do it with my number 6 all the time. So we've got a little bit of a dark head, here, so just literally a dot. And you've got them sheep here already. You do 2 little dots underneath for the legs. And then I just want you to take a bit of the green and blue mixed together. So just dab them on. Just dab your brush off a little bit, and you're just going to touch at the bottom. So don't touch the heads, just touch the feet. That's going to give you a bit of shadow. Rinse my brush off, and then I'm just softening that shadow in. And there we go.